Good evening and welcome to one of our another discussion on geopolitical events with global significance. This is one of our routine and regular roundtable discussion which we have been organizing so far. We have in the past organized various discussion on the China, Indo-Pacific. Previously, we also organized one Taiwan-India journalist conclave. So this field is something which is very dear to us and very familiar to us. So on the behalf of Usanas Foundation, I would like to welcome all the eminent panelists today and our session chairperson. I'll just introduce all the panelists and the session chairperson. I'll begin with the session chairperson, Dr. Jagannath Panda. So we actually wanted to invite Dr. Panda for a very, very long time. I guess since last year, but it has been it's been delayed for some reason. And today we have him with us here, and we're really very proud and honored to have Dr. Panda on board today. So Dr. Jagannath Panda, he is currently heading Stockholm Center for South Asian and Indo-Pacific Affairs, an Institute for Security and Development Policy, Sweden. Previously, he worked with IDSC. We have opening remarks by Dr. Namrata Hasija. She is a research associate at Center for China Analysis and Strategy and President, Taiwan Alumni Association, India. Then we have Dr. James Dorsey, who is an adjunct senior fellow at S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies and Nanyang Technological University. Sir, to you, we wanted to invite you also for a very, very long time. And in fact, I remember you had written one piece in Eurasian Review. There was on Kashmir, and it was about some clash between the Iranian and Saudi proxies. And in that, you had cited one of my article. I was really very glad and very happy to see.
My pleasure.
And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, thank you. Then we have Dr. Shriparna Pathak with us, who is an associate professor at Jindal School of International Affairs, OP Jindal University. She also joined our previous discussions with Israeli panelists and the Reichman University, which were on basically China's increasing footprint in West Asia. Then we also have Dr. Ming-Shih Shen, who is a research fellow, Division of Chinese Politics, Military and Warfighting Concept, Institute for National Defense Security Research, Taiwan. Then we have Sin Yu Roberto Lin. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing the name wrongly. Please correct me if it's. He's editor South Asia Watch, focuses on South Asia regional strategic and China's regional policies. So we have all our distinguished panelists here with us today, and I will also welcome all the participants today on the behalf of Usanas Foundation. Without wasting much time, I'll give a warm welcome to our session chairperson, Dr. Jagannath Panda, and hand over the baton to him to start and conduct and navigate and enlighten and guide today's session on the recent geopolitical crisis in Taiwan. Over to you, Dr. Panda.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Okay, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Mr. Pandya. It's never late, and I think I'm really thankful for this kind invitation. And also, I thank your foundation, Usanas Foundation, and Ms. Preeti for this coordination. It's also great to see, some of the familiar faces from India and Taiwan, particularly my friends from both sides, and also international observers like Mr. Dorsey, whom I frequently read here and there, and I have a great admiration for his write-ups. Now, let me share my thoughts. I was just trying to compose a piece about the fourth Taiwan crisis for my next column. And what I interestingly found that here we are talking about fourth Taiwan crisis. And therefore, when we are talking about fourth Taiwan crisis and the geopolitical impact, I think we need to also revisit and review what the previous three Taiwan crises has actually resulted into. What has it has left for the global politics, how the global politics that time was and how it has evolved since then. Unless we study the history, the background, we cannot really readily focus about the outcome of the fourth Taiwan crisis. And therefore, when you talk about the first Taiwan Strait crisis, which is from 1954 to 55, and the second Taiwan crisis, which is in 1508, if we take these two Taiwan crises into account, there is an interesting, global couple of events that needs to be taken into account. One is the India-China war, the China-India war, rather, I should say, when China attacked India in 1962. That event had a significant and huge impact not only on China-India relations, on India's perception on China, but also the way the Chinese attacked India. That also came as a lesson for many countries, many other elements and regions in the world, including Taiwan. The second thing is that I think when we take into account the first Taiwan crisis and the second Taiwan crisis, after that, what we have seen is that PRC as a power has capitalized in the global forums, including in the United Nations Security Council when it secured the P5 membership, permanent 5 membership. That actually guided the PRC's course of action for next few decades to come. Interestingly, when we arrived at the third Taiwan crisis, where actually, President Lee Teng-hui visited to the US in 1995, that was also an interesting time because after that, the world was going through a transition when there was a fall of the Soviet Union in 1980, 89 and 90s. And then we transferred into the post-Cold War period. And that period was very critical because that is the particular time when there was a stamping authority of the United States of America in the world politics as the #1 power, and it continued to be the sole power. And the world politics in many ways was unipolar in nature in the post-Cold War period. So I think these three things we have to keep it in mind. And what is the relevance, why I'm highlighting these aspects? Today, the world is definitely not unipolar anymore. And when we're talking about the fourth Taiwan crisis, we have to factor the fourth Taiwan crisis in the context of the multipolar dynamics of the world politics, where the power sector is very much bipolar, but the politics is very much multipolar. So the power sector is very much bipolar means it is the US-China politics, it is the US-China dynamics that dominates the global politics. Whereas when we talk about the geopolitics in a larger sense, the world is very much multipolar in nature. And the other aspect, I think, what is the connections between the fourth Taiwan crisis and the earlier Taiwan crisis? Today, the PRC has become much more stronger militarily, economically, and also in terms of its foreign policy outreach. I think it is not the same People's Republic of China that it used to be in 50s and 60s. So therefore, we have to face the fourth Taiwan crisis if it is arising, or if some scholars are already arguing that the crisis has already arrived, then we have to face a much stronger China in terms of military consequences, in terms of economic consequences, of course, in terms of political consequences, because what we are seeing, even after the Ukraine war, there is a nuanced understanding between China and Russia in the United Nations Security Council. So I think these two bipolar centric politics within the United Nations Security Council itself also hugely influenced the fourth Taiwan crisis. Now, few thoughts before I invite other speakers to share their thoughts. I think when Pelosi visited, Taiwan, I think there was a huge reaction from China, mainland China, and that reaction was probably for obvious reasons. There was official reactions. They canceled few mechanisms with the US, but most importantly, if we read between the lines, what the Chinese media and also what the official narratives was indicating, that the Chinese called it a salvo of war, America's salvo of war. And I think that means the Chinese were trying to build up a war context in the context of Pelosi's visit. And I think that is something we need to take into account, because many countries in the world are not really ready for a war consequences. India, I don't think India is ready for a war consequences, either fighting with China on the boundaries to directly, or trying to take a partisan view on the Taiwan on the Taiwan issue. I don't think India would like to take part in any kind of crisis when it comes to Taiwan crisis. But again, I think many countries like India would not probably be ready to take a position, and many countries in the world probably are not really ready to face the war consequences. Similarly, if we talk about the military consequences, as I mentioned, I think the People's Liberation Army and the People's Republic of China are a much more stronger military power today. But at the same time, I think here I would be happy to hear what Professor Sun Ming-Shih is actually talking about. But my impression is that the PLA is still not really ready psychologically and militarily to go for a war-like situation. I think primarily the primary reasons is that they don't have war building experiences, war fighting experiences. And when we talk about the diplomatic angle, I think what we have also seen simultaneously that probably the fourth Taiwan crisis is mounting, and at some stage in 4 to 5 years, probably we might see that the Taiwan crisis would turn into a kind of a more military escalation or a war-like situation. But again, I think China is preparing more diplomatic grounds to go for a military attack at some point, maybe in next few years. And therefore, we could see that the Chinese are trying to cozying up more with Russia, with North Korea, and with a range of countries in Middle East, including Turkey. And I think those aspects should not be overlooked, because in a war-like situation, when we're talking, particularly in this seminar, when we are talking about geopolitical consequences, in a war-like situation, three things become more critical. One is the energy issue. And as you could see, because of the Ukraine-Russia war, there is a huge demand of energy resources across the world. And the whole European community, in fact, as I am based here in Stockholm and Europe, I could share with you, there is a huge debate going on about the energy crisis, the forthcoming energy crisis, or the demands relates to the energy, gas, and oils and all. So Middle East, some of the West Asian countries or Middle Eastern countries are critical to it. Second, when a war kind of situation arises or a war breaks out, there is also a food shortage and food crisis might happen. And I think we should be very mindful about that. I don't think Taiwan would be really, suffering from food crisis, but definitely given the PLA's military overtures, we should be really prepared for that kind of consequences. The third is the communications, not only the air communication, the flight communications, but also the maritime communications in terms of preserving the sea line of communications, because those are the main mediums of energy transportation and gas transportation. So I think these are the 2-3 grave scenarios, including the world economic scenarios, we should be really discussing about. But as far as the Taiwan issue is concerned, I think the Indo-Pacific region, including India and the other Indo-Pacific like-minded partners, needs to have a much more clarity about the Taiwan issue, how to provide security to Taiwan, and also how to bring Taiwan more into the Indo-Pacific umbrella. And I think that is the most immediate strategic requirement at this point. I think with these initial observations, let me stop here and then probably welcome my colleague Namrata Hasija to make few opening remarks, and then we can go to other excellent panelists we have gathered for this session to have their views on the subject. Over to you, Namrata.
Thank you, Dr. Panda. I think you've basically laid the ground for our session ahead very nicely, but I'll pick up from what you said. Very important thing you said, that probably PLA itself is not prepared psychologically and also otherwise, because they have not fought a war after the Vietnam War. Let me, kind of pick it up from here, because I am not talking about the geopolitical consequences of this, technically the fourth Taiwan crisis that we have right now. What I would like to bring out is, that even within the Chinese elite, as we can call, of course, the party cadres, PLA veterans and academicians, and the think tank community, there is no unanimous, unanimous decision as to the military reunification of Taiwan. I think that's very important, because, as soon as, Nancy Pelosi's visit, we saw a number of articles where, of course, even before that, there was one article which said that Taiwan is the most dangerous place on earth to live. And I think, people have suddenly, jumped to conclusions about definitely having that China is going to try for a military reunification. But to my knowledge, I feel, even at this juncture, when the tensions were very high and elevated, the Communist Party's Youth League, which is very aggressive and vocal when it comes to certain sensitive issues, they called for restraint. And they said that they should not be China should not sacrifice the entire chessboard for one piece, that is Taiwan. So what I want to bring out is that, of course, after Xi Jinping's, after he's become the General Secretary of People's Republic People's Republic of China in 2012, it has triggered an overall approach of PRC's dealing, especially with domestic and international issues. Of course, at the 19th Party Congress, he very explicitly defined that they are going to recover the lost territories, and which they had lost through the unequal treaties. But over the years, and especially today, if we see People's Daily article, there was a report that was published in People's Daily today about a conference that happened, and where Chen Yuanfeng, who's the Deputy Director of Taiwan Affairs Office of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, he very categorically said that since the 18th Party Congress, CPC has actually promoted peaceful reunification with Taiwan, adhering to the 1992 consensus. And of course, he made it very clear that they oppose Taiwan independence. And a special paragraph was mentioned about the DPP and how the Taiwanese ruling party is trying to, seek independence. But he very, line by line, he said how, a lot of Taiwanese businesses are dependent on China, how, the largest Chinese, exports, the largest exports that the Chinese mainland does is actually Taiwan. And he spoke about the cross-strait relations, and he said that peaceful reunification is what the Chinese Communist Party is striving for. And here, let me bring in a few more examples where a very important article was actually published by Sui Lei. He is he's a research fellow at the China Institute of International Studies, a think tank that is affiliated with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And this article was published on 26 February 2021. And I think he highlighted a very important aspect. He said that mainland China is in no position to take Taiwan by force. And he gave two reasons for that. The first reason, he said, was the domestic political risks are very high, and in the event of an unsuccessful show of force. So, like he said that in case, Xi Jinping goes for a military attack, and we also have to understand that when we are talking about a military attack on Taiwan, it has to be coordination between China's Air Force, Navy, and its ground forces. It cannot it has to be an amphibious attack. So that coordination has to be there, and they have to, properly prepare for it, which definitely it's, and what Xi Jinping would be looking at is a quick victory. And, he, of course, has learned lessons from the Ukraine war, how prolonged wars can be. So I think he made a very important point where he said that mainland China is in no position because of the domestic political risk. In case Xi Jinping loses, he's already under a lot of pressure from, internally. Then what will happen? The second, he said that Xi Jinping needs a stable domestic political environment to ensure that the extension of his term as General Secretary. We know the 20th Party Congress is coming. The dates have already been announced. So I think what he said that in case, he would not risk domestic instability and provoke public discontent and stir a backlash just before the 20th Party Congress. So we definitely have, and the other thing that is at the back of Xi Jinping's mind is the cost-benefit analysis, that in case he attacks, what will be the reaction from the US and Japan? That is very, of course, important for him also, because I think they are calculating one of the main reasons that's stopping them is the US reaction. And in the recent times, we have seen that many times US has actually openly said that they are, going to, of course, help Taiwan. How much they help is a different question. That's another topic that we can debate. So I think in this overall scenario, one thing that the question that we need to ask is, does Chinese President Xi Jinping, does he have the political will? So I feel that the domestic situation in China is not very favorable for him due to the removal of term limit from the apex post in the party, mishandling of the COVID-19, and a depleting economy. He's already facing a lot of criticism within the party. We have seen important people like, one of them, of course, Professor Xu Changrong, who from the Tsinghua University, who was very blunt in his criticism. So I think, these are the factors that Xi Jinping will definitely, take into account. And I think Xi Jinping would not want an armed conflict by launching a military attack on Taiwan, especially under such domestic conditions. But on the other hand, there is another situation where if he perceives that the domestic situation is getting out of hand, he might want to externalize the situation by choosing a military action. So it's kind of, we have to wait and watch maybe after the 20th Party Congress, at least 2-3 years after the 20th Party Congress, as to how situation is. But as for now, I feel he will definitely, not think of a military action in the near future. I would like to end my remarks here, and maybe the panelists can expand on it.
Yeah, I thank you very much for those observations. I do completely agree with you. I think definitely the Chinese are in a wait and watch period, and I think they would not like to do anything stupid right now, which will create more pressure for them, and particularly for Xi Jinping before the Party Congress. But let's discuss this issue more closely when we have Q&A. But I think with this note, let me invite Dr. James Dorsey. He's an adjunct senior fellow at RSIS in Nanyang Technological University. Over to you, Mr. Dorsey. You are muted. We can't hear you. Please unmute yourself.
Dr. Dorsey, you are on mute.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Very kind introduction, Dr. Panda. And of course, I thank the foundation for including me in this illustrious panel. The my two former speakers have set up the stage for me very well. It strikes me that Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan was an accident waiting to happen. It was, in my mind, not the visit itself that sparked escalated tension, including the Chinese military exercise in the Taiwan Straits, but the context of escalating tension between the United States and China that magnified the visit's importance. It strikes me also that a comparison to Ukraine and the Russian invasions brings us into sharper focus. The difference between Ukraine and Taiwan is that the Ukraine is black and white, an open and shut case. In other words, there are no ambiguities. Whatever the Russian justification, be it alleged NATO encroachment or the assertion that Ukraine is Russia, the invasion was an attack on an internationally recognized country and a violation of its internationally recognized borders. What is at stake in Ukraine is respect for international law and the principle of whether might is right and the rule of the jungle can be tolerated. That is not quite the case in Taiwan. In fact, the Pelosi visit could be seen as taking the US policy of strategic ambiguity to a new level. China perceived the visit, perhaps not without reason, as a challenge to the one China policy that supposedly recognizes Taiwan as part of China, even if that may not really be the case. Strategic ambiguity was evident in the White House and the State Department's response to the Pelosi visit. Both entities not only distanced themselves from the visit, arguing that Congress was an independent branch of government, but went out of their way to reiterate the one China policy in clearer terms than the United States has done in the past. At the same time, US President Joe Biden has been clearer than his predecessors in expressing the US commitment to defend Taiwan against potential Chinese encroachment, including a military attack on Taiwan. The legal basis, however, is very different from that of Ukraine. In fact, I would argue that the interpretation of the One China policy has led a life of its own. If one goes back to the original expression of the policy in the days of Richard Nixon's rapprochement with China, what one sees is that there is no legal agreement to undergird the policy. The One China policy is grounded in a statement by the United States at the time. The statement does not recognize Taiwan as part of China. It simply acknowledges China's claim to Taiwan. That is the basis of the One China policy. The Chinese claim invokes not the principle of a threat to an internationally recognized country, but raises the question whether it encroaches on the principle of the internationally recognized right of self-determination. There is, however, a larger context for the Pelosi visit that relates to both Taiwan and Ukraine and beyond that, and that is the fact that the Russian and Chinese presidents Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are part of a group of powerful world leaders that think in civilizational rather than national terms. They see their countries as civilizational, not national entities. They envision the borders of their countries not as defined by international law, but by civilizational reach. In Russia's case, it is the concept of the Russian world, a concept that defines Russia's borders by wherever there are ethnic Russians, Russian speakers, and/or adherents to Russian culture. The leaders of Serbia and Hungary, Alexander Vučić and Viktor Orban, have recently put forward similar conceptualizations of a Serbian and Hungarian world. China has not framed its claims to Taiwan or the South China Sea or the ethnic Chinese diaspora as a Chinese world, but acts as if such a world exists and on a belief that it is China's right to control and manage it. Both China and Russia assert their claims on the basis of military might and economic strength, rather than by using the legal and political tools available to them. This is what makes these crises issues of the rule of the jungle versus the rule of law. Furthermore, this is what makes the war in Ukraine a struggle for international law and rule of law, not a battle between democracy and autocracy, as Mr. Biden has framed it. That is true for Taiwan too, if one positions the Taiwan issue as one of the right to self-determination. Countering the quest of civilizational leaders requires more than piecemeal responses, no matter how massive and significant the US and European military support of Ukraine is, or the degree of US commitment to the defense of Taiwan. The credibility of US and European actions rests on their ability to project the principled stand rather one that is rooted in double standards. In other words, international law cannot be selectively invoked. The law is either universal or it is not. That is the message that many countries have conveyed with their reluctance to join the United States and Europe in its support of Ukraine and condemnation of Russia. While Russia and China have benefited from the perception of US and European double standards, fact of the matter is that the invasion of Ukraine does not sit well with countries that have remained aloof in the Ukraine conflict. That was evident at the recent summit in Samarkand of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where Mr. Putin did not get the reception that he may have expected. Following a one-on-one meeting with Mr. Xi, Mr. Putin was forced to acknowledge that China had questions and concerns about the Ukraine war. Similarly, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi articulated his unease with Russian actions. No doubt, China will draw conclusions regarding how far it is willing to go in risking anytime soon an armed conflict with the United States over Taiwan. it will look not only at the support for Ukraine, but also at the degree of unity that the transatlantic alliance has been able to sustain with regard to Ukraine. Of course, that unity is likely to be tested when winter in Europe kicks in and the fallout of the energy crisis is felt in homes and businesses. Even so, going forward, China is likely to tread carefully, despite its robust, aggressive, and intimidating rhetoric. It will find comfort in the fact that if there is one thing China and the United States agree on, it is that neither wants a military confrontation at this point. Thank you for your attention. I hope we can delve deeper into all of this in the question and answer session.
Thank you very much. Those were very useful remarks. In fact, I do agree with you that how cold the Central Asian countries or the Eurasian countries were in terms of hosting Putin during the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And the Chinese have taken a strong note about this. And I think the Chinese are first learning the lessons from the Ukraine war. Very, very carefully, they are monitoring each and every developments that goes on between Russia and Ukraine and between Russia and the larger European community. But with this note, let me invite Professor Shen. He is from Institute for National Defense Security Research. I know for a fact that he has been, observing these issues very closely for many, many years. So I'm sure his remarks will be very interesting for all of us to, take it forward in terms of discussion. Over to you, Professor Shen.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good evening. Panda just mentioned about that fourth Taiwan Strait crisis. We know that the first one is 1954 to 1955. That is a withdrawal from Dachen Island. This is the first one. In this time, Taiwan had formal relation with United States and also have a defense agreement. And in 1958 is Kinmen is Sherling, is artillery battle in this time. We need to notice that in this year, in mainland China, they have the so-called 大跃进, and Mao Zedong tried to transfer that domestic issue to the outside. So he's starting the sheer attack the Kinmen. The third one, 1995 and 1996, Taiwan and United States already cut the formal relation, but Taiwan also have a Taiwan Relation Act and the United States support. So they sent 2 aircraft carrier to help Taiwan. And in 2022, of course, yeah, no formal relation. And then you can see, but I will mention about that before the first Taiwan crisis in 1949 in Kinmen, there's a battle. PLA landing Kinmen, and then defeated by the ROC or KMT military. That's the first landing operation in Taiwan Strait. We mentioned about that 2022 Taiwan crisis. We need to look back these 4 Taiwan crisis. We need to check what the role of the United States, what's the factor of the Chinese domestic factor, and then Taiwan's leadership, how to think about this Taiwan crisis. Because before the 1994, we are a KMT regime, just like China, the same. And we can see that there's a civil war, continue of the civil war. Okay, and then let me back to the Pelosi visits. I conclude that China's intention of the encircle Taiwan military drill and exercise, I have 3 points. The first one is China tried to cover up the misjudgment of the United States House of Representatives Speaker Pelosi visit to Taiwan, because China had previously assessed that Pelosi might cancel a visit to Taiwan or proceeded a low-key manner after Xi Jinping talked with Biden. But judging from the Pelosi itinerary, visiting Taiwan should be the one of her main goal. So it makes China or Xi Jinping lose his faith China had no choice but need to take a serious countermeasure. So conducting a containment style military drill or exercise against Taiwan and launch rocket and missile at this the sex target area. And but we can see that after the missile launch, it still send warship and airplane to train near Taiwan area, and expressing that China want to maintain deterrence and warning, and is reluctant to let the matter end too early. China don't want to that the exercise ended early. The second point is China tried to transform the focus on the Beidaihe conference. Maybe Pelosi don't know he visit time is just the Beidaihe conference time. So Pelosi visit to Taiwan coincides the Beidaihe conference of China, which is particularly related to the distribution of power of a 20-party Congress of the CCP. If an event affecting core interests occur at this time, China will definitely react strongly so as to avoid being the challenge by the different faction within the party, and China try to form a united line. A different faction were united together to against United States. And the third point is China try to warn and prevent further development of United States and Taiwan relation. We can see that Pelosi is a number 3 figure in the United States, and her visit to Taiwan has a symbolic significance. And because of the increasingly close relationship between the United States and Taiwan, and China does not want to see that big advance diplomatic relation, because we can see that many Congress members said United States need to build the diplomatic relation with Taiwan. So China hear that voice. So China also afraid that the United States and Taiwan will become the military ally. And because of this factor, China must divided the relationship between United States and Taiwan, or prevent the further development of the relationship. And China will strengthen the military threat to United States and Taiwan. And in fact, we can find that China action had just opposite effect. And China's top action against Taiwan had made the international community pay more attention to the security of the Taiwan Strait and concern Taiwan's strong countermeasure in order to against China's action. And then I think there are some implication about this time encircle Taiwan drill to Taiwan. The first one is this military operation is not a prelude to war, although it cannot be ruled out that China might take a favorable opportunity to turn the exercise into the invasion. But they need more time to mobilize and assemble troops from other theater, a command or other service, because this drill only focus on Eastern Theater Command. No military come from South Theater Command or Central Theater Command. The second is as China might have taken advantage of the exercise to form the sequence and the procedure to wage war with obvious influence from the Russian invasion to the Ukraine, they could take further military action against Taiwan at a critical time in the future. The third point is this exercise was merely China's response to the visit of the Pelosi, which was escalated due to the sensitive timing of the 20-party Congress. So since Taiwan did not have any provocation action, we not mention we don't have any action that claim Taiwan independence or something like that. So China's action were obviously lacking legality and legitimacy. The fourth point is Taiwan was able to analyze the situation in advance and grasp the situation and deploy troop and combat capacity in a timely manner to deal with the threat. In the future, such Chinese exercise can be used as an opportunity to test Taiwan's resilience and readiness for defensive operation. Since the drill procedure of the Chinese exercise, from we can see that a cyber attack to the physical blockade are similar to those of the future military operation against Taiwan, and they can be used by the Taiwan force and related unit to improve our existing standard operation doctrine, operational strategy. Fifth point, in response to the China's intensified military threat and Taiwan exiting defense and the reserve mobilization reform must be accelerated. And the original long-term armed force building plan must take emergency preparedness into the consideration as well. The last point is China launched a cyber attack on Taiwan military and civilian facility before the exercise, but fortunately, the damage was quickly restored, and thanks to the government's previous effort to enhance our cyber resilience. However, most websites of private enterprise are usually built by third-party companies, were vulnerable to attack and should be included as part of the overall national resilience initiative in the future. And then we can see that a scenario if Taiwan occupied by China, I think this is the worst possible situation. If Taiwan is occupied, China will attack back Diaoyutai from Japan and break through the first island chain, and Chinese military power will directly threaten the backyard of Japan and the Philippines. And Guam and Hawaii will become the first line of defense of the United States. And because of the occupation of Taiwan, China will extend to the 9-dash line that now becomes 11-dash line because already includes Taiwan, and making the South China Sea to be China's inland sea, even Taiwan Strait to be an inland sea. When the territorial sovereignty issue in eastern China is resolved, I think the next step will resolve the China-Indian border dispute. Whether Ladakh or Arunachal Pradesh will become China's next target. If China achieves this strategic goal, it will undoubtedly become the world's #1 power. When a communist state dominates development of the world order, it will become a global catastrophe or tragedy. And the next is the United States-led democratic allies will be challenged. The competition between United States and China is not only a struggle for national strength, but also a struggle of enduring value, a democracy and a communist. If China overtakes the United States or over beyond the United States and dominate the global economic development, I think many countries will turn to China and become more dependent on China, both diplomatically and economically. The democratic alliance originally dominated by the United States will be split and disintegrate, and China, which had lost its check and balance, and will expand more strongly. Finally, I will make a conclusion that China wants to reunify Taiwan, but Taiwan will never accept the rule of the Communist Party. In order to defend the value of the democracy and the freedom, Taiwan must resist China's aggression and hope to gain the support and assistance of democracy of the country. It will push the security cooperation of democratic country and let it become more important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chen. In fact, those are very useful comments. I do agree with you on one point that there are severe implications for India from the Taiwan crisis. And I think, as you rightly pointed out about the boundary dispute, I think India needs to take a strong note of the consequences that might arise, particularly in the Ladakh region or in the eastern sector, in the Arunachal sector. And also your point on cyber attack is a valid one. And I think we need to really take a cognizance of this fact in Indo-Pacific region, how to really build a more resilient cyber world in terms of facing the Chinese, and also including attacks from other authoritarian powers, including North Korea and Russia. Let me now go next to Dr. Pathak, Sripanna Pathak. She's Associate Professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs in OP Jindal Global Universities. Over to you, Dr. Sripanna.
Thank you so much. Big thank you to Usanas Foundation for organizing this very timely discussion. Thank you, Mr. Panda. Thank you, Ms. Preeti Kenta. You've been very patient with all of us. Thank you, Dr. Panda, and thank you, Ms. Hasija, because you all mentioned some points, from where I'll take off. What I'm going to do briefly today is that I will talk about China's internal political and economic developments, which surround this huge hullabaloo which China is creating around Taiwan. Now, Nancy Pelosi's visit was extremely defiant. It was unannounced. As one of the panelists said, that it was hoped by the PRC that it would be small scale or it would be called off, but nevertheless it happened. And this came in the backdrop of China's uncalled for, politically disastrous and militarily indefensible escalation for the past few years. Now, Pelosi called off China's bluff on playing with fire by visiting Taiwan on 3rd August amidst China's extreme diplomatic pressures. Pelosi praised Taiwan's bubbling democracy, called the beleaguered island as a friend, and defended it in her speeches during the whirlwind less than a day visit. Now, even though China threatened to retaliate to the visit, Pelosi continued her visit nonchalantly, making China to blink in this first round. President Xi Jinping, as Ms. Hasija also mentioned briefly, he has been making extremely caustic comments on Taiwan since 2012. And with the 2017 19-party Congress, he even stated, and I quote, "We will never allow anyone, any organization or any political party at any time or in form to separate any part of the Chinese territory from China." Further, at the Communist Party's centennial in July 2021, Xi even threatened to break the heads of those who interfere with Taiwan. So he's been making a lot of these comments, but nonetheless, Pelosi did visit. China could not stop Pelosi's visit. So, and this, as one of the panelists has also mentioned previously, this is around the 20th Party Congress this November, where Xi is seeking a third term. And this could become decisive. So naturally, when this happened, it was understood that at what was then the upcoming Peitaihe meeting of high-level party leaders, that was going to be stormy. In China, there have been these rumors that Li Keqiang is set to become the next general secretary, while she remains president and chairman of the Central Military Commission. So in August this year, Xi Jinping visited the Liaoshen Campaign Memorial, marking the place from which the communists had launched an offensive during the Chinese Civil War, while Li Keqiang laid flowers at the bronze statue of Deng Xiaoping in Shenzhen, the starting point for Deng's reforms and opening policy. Now, this needs a closer read, which indicates the kinds of pressures that Xi is currently facing ahead of the 20th Party Congress. The fact that Li laid flowers to Deng Xiaoping in Shenzhen is an indication of an objection to Xi Jinping's complete lack of emphasis of economic development, a reflection of the extent of dissatisfaction with Xi's COVID-19 measures and economic policies in Chinese society. Right now, Liaoning and Northeast China are economically struggling. Northeast China has many state-owned enterprises. It's experiencing severe depopulation. When Xi discussed economic issues during his visit to Liaoning, he displayed a stance of wanting to address what are really some of the issues facing the Chinese economy in general. Li, on the other hand, acted to shine a light on another, on the issue of growth. At present, China is facing significant economic challenges as it struggles to balance the need to continue achieving economic growth with pressing issues involving the redistribution of wealth. With declining real estate prices and other factors, local government finances are also in dire straits. So the actions of Xi and Li from August 16 to be precise, may be telling us that while personnel affairs were surely going to be a very hot topic in Petaihe, which they were, these questions around improvement of the economy or restructuring of domestic governance have been there for some time now. So now, since I mentioned economic pressures, what sort of economic pressures is China really facing? Why are these pressures going to be something which are going to be difficult to address at the 20th Party Congress? Now, before any discussion on China's current economic crisis, the fact to remember here is that the CPC liberated, quote unquote, liberated China from feudalism, imperialism, exploitation, and promised a better future in terms of more egalitarianism, wealth distribution, employment, wages, etc. So the expectation naturally has been that communism or the CPC would lead China to a better future. Socialism with Chinese characteristics would create better lives for the billions of Chinese people. Has that really happened? In order to understand that, let's take a look at some of the pressures which China is currently facing. And these are facts just from 2021. I'm not even going back into 2020 or 2019. This becomes important to understand as these become important factors to understand why China is trying to rake up nationalism against Taiwan. First, the massive restrictions due to zero COVID policies led to several millions of Chinese being in partial or complete lockdown with hardships. The economic growth is declining due to these policies and due to the ongoing tariff wars with the US. When Pelosi's aircraft landed in Taiwan with the US Air Force flight escort, one of China's original three no's got punctured. The three no's that Taiwan should not become independent, no foreign troops in Taiwan soil, no to Taiwan's nuclear weapons program. With such a military aircraft landing in Taiwan, China's inability to stop this sort of a landing not just exposed China's weaknesses, but also was, it was a sort of a beacon light for possible defiance by other countries in future. Now, data released in July by China's National Bureau of Statistics shows that youth unemployment hit 19.3% in June. It's the highest level since the data was first made public 4 years ago. Nearly 1/5 of young Chinese people are unemployed. Nearly 11 million newly minted college graduates, the class of 2022, have joined this daunting job market. After a relatively smooth recovery from the initial stages of the pandemic, China's economy has slowed to a crawl as a result of the rolling COVID lockdowns across the country. GDP growth dipped to 0.4% in the second quarter of the year, far below the government's annual target of 5.5%. Only 0.71%, only 0.71 jobs were available for each graduate in the first quarter of the year. And this is according to Chaopin, a Chinese job recruitment site. On the other side of the job market, where less educated applicants might find work, China doesn't have enough people trained in advanced manufacturing. This is tied to Made in China 2025. Now, the mismatch between the jobs that are available and Chinese students' educational training remains significant. Then there's a problem with Xi Jinping's common prosperity. Under the broad umbrella of reducing inequality, the government began rolling out a raft of new regulations on companies, a campaign that escalated when Chinese President, when Xi Jinping gave a speech on what he called common prosperity last summer. Common prosperity would be the linchpin of his government's domestic policy. And one of the targets of this common prosperity campaign was Chinese corporations that were deemed to have grown too greedy. That led to a crackdown, which has hurt the job market. China's technology industry has been hit particularly hard. Chinese regulators have fined tech giants, including Alibaba and Tencent, billions of dollars for their monopolistic practices. In the wake of the crackdown, tech's exuberant growth has been curtailed. Now, many private internet companies, for example, are firing more than they hire. Firing more than they hire is, of course, a problem when there's already a sort of jobless growth. Now, in addition to this, like their global peers, businesses in China are dealing with cost pressures, including elevated prices of oil, grains, meat, and other commodities. So what companies are now trying to do is that they are shrinking package sizes or filling containers with less products, which is of course not acceptable to the consumer. Some businesses have been simply absorbing the increases or using creative approaches to keep a lid on costs. Beyond unemployment, inequality, slow growth, and zero COVID, there's another problem. China's existing water insecurity, and it's getting aggravated by a heat wave and drought on a globally unprecedented scale. This will likely be a recurrent phenomenon since it probably stems from climate change induced changes in weather patterns. So the Chinese government has limited means to address this problem's structural aspects. What it's probably going to do is focus on ameliorating the symptoms through greater interventions in international hydrocarbon and agricultural markets and increased power generation. So now, amidst all of this, the question still remains, why Taiwan? Why threaten to attack Taiwan from time to time? Why now? So at a juncture when the CPC is seen as failing its people badly, yet Xi Jinping wants to show how relevant his governance is, the best way to display this is by evoking nationalism, by showing to the domestic population and to the elites that Western powers, particularly the US, is trying to break away what China traditionally claims as its territory. So a muscular posture emerges. This is exactly why Xi Jinping visited the Liaoshen Campaign Memorial on August 16, which is the place from which the communists launched the offensive during the Chinese Civil War. This is an attempt to showcase the vitality of the CPC, to remind the people that the best option for China is an aggressive option. But even after Pelosi's visits, there have been multiple visits puncturing Beijing's muscular narrative. Since the US speaker's visit, groups from US, Japan, Lithuania have arrived in Taipei, vowing that they won't be bullied by Beijing. And more are coming. So in short, China's domestic weaknesses and Xi's insecurities with regards to the 20th Party Congress form a very important aspect of PRC's shrill shrieks around Taiwan. So thank you for your patience. Over to you, Dr. Panda.
Thank you very much. Those were excellent remarks. And that's why in India, we need to take a more note of the Chinese economic development, the domestic situation, particularly the areas of crisis that China is currently facing. And I do take your points well noted that there are existing problems within China, including water scarcity, unemployment rising, and also economic slowdown. Those are critical factors for Xi Jinping, which is driving him to invoke nationalism. I do agree with you. But let's also invite the last but not least, I think Sinyo, if I'm pronouncing your name. Yes.
Yeah.
Welcome to you, and please go ahead and make your remarks. Then we'll go for a quick discussion.
Honorable Chair and the distinguished fellow delegates, good evening. And I appreciate the Usanas Foundation and Namrata inviting. And I'm very glad to meet the Dr. Shen in here. We haven't seen each other since I left my job in Taipei. At first, I want to have a briefly introduction for myself. I'm Roberto Lin, and the editor of the South Asia Watch. South Asia Watch is a website page by Mandarin, which founded by Dr. Ming-Shih. It presents and introduces the relationship of the South Asia state, and including the political, cultural, and social issue and information here. And we hope to, through the power of the words, to make the reader in the Chinese-speaking regions to know, to can be better to understand the India or the South Asia's country. And actually, I was assistant research fellow of think tank in my last career, but however, I resigned the job for a while. So therefore, I'm up for sharing my observation of the ordinary Taiwanese people and the public think about this the fourth crisis of the Taiwan Strait and the People's Republic of China's deterrence after Ms. Pelosi visit Taiwan. Okay, and CPC has never given up the policy of reunified Taiwan or unified Taiwan by force. From the resolution 2758 to the PLA Air Force crossing the middle line of the Taiwan Strait recent year. Even after the Speaker Pelosi visiting Taiwan in this August, and President Joe Biden said the U.S. would defend Taiwan if China attacked. Or we could see the arrogant and the demeaning reaction from Beijing. Actually, people on the internet of Taiwan usually call China, I mean the PRC, as the hero lovers. So it is mean that she or he want to keep dating with you and even marry you, but he didn't allow you to have your personal will or thoughts. If you do so, he will try to reunify you by force. And even the usual visiting or showing our flag of nation, Beijing government can always translate the behavior as Taiwan want to seek the independence. But must to know, Taiwan or the Republic of China, which is not People's Republic of China, is a democratic country to the world, and the future of the nation could be different voice from different voice. Common claim of it, including two of them, and one is the Taiwan should be independent from the ROC, and another claim is that Republic of China is Taiwan and in Taiwan. And the first one who support the Taiwan independence think that Taiwan is unique and the independence country, and it should be independent from the Republic of China. These supporters thought that because of the end of the World War II in 1945, and Kuomintang took over it. So in this logic, Taiwan should be independent from ROC, not PRC. And the second one is that the ROC government is in Taiwan. Their thinking is in hesitating the exposition of the President Lee Teng-hui, and they think the ROC government is from the Chinese history and the traditionals, but due to the civil war in 1949, make the government migrate to Taipei. So in this logically, and no matter Taiwanese people choose the way for which way, and Taiwan is not. Beijing government always said that Taiwan is part of People's Republic of China. This viewpoint is never established. And then even so in this term, the fourth Taiwan crisis of the Strait, that China do a lot of the military exercise around the Taiwan's island, and this behavior is helpless to the peaceful of the region, and it doesn't help anything to the policy that want to reunify Taiwan. And after Pelosi came to Taiwan, Beijing took make a lot of the military exercise and launched the rocket to the Taiwan Strait oceans, and forbidden Taiwan's product export to China. And many observers or foreign media were worried about the tensions of the situation would go wrong and make the World War III happen or break out. But interesting is that the general people in Taiwan doesn't respond too much for the drill, or most of them thought that it's just a cookie cutter statement, just the same thing, because China always say the same thing to respond to what Taiwan do, any behavior in the international. That is why you can see the people in Taiwan in the August, even the military exercise is operating. The people in Taiwan still shopping outdoor or do a normal life. But in here should be attention is that it doesn't mean Taiwan just give up to China, because Taiwan is an island. If the World War III is happen, and we just need to face it, and the life still need to go on. And so what I thought is the military draw is not just for the counter the Taiwan and US interaction, but also Xi Jinping want to shift the focus that China COVID-19 lockdown and the economic crisis. So in the other hand, the most important issue that Namrata just said that 20 National Congress in CPC will opening in the middle of next month. It is the first party Congress after China amend the constitution in 2018. Xi Jinping is expect to prepare for his third term of the rule, and this will be the second ticket for the president position. And the first ticket is the amendment of the constitution. So in any issue it related Taiwan and the COVID-19 is both domestic issues to CPC. So it also related the Xi Jinping's plan to keep the ruling. And as we know, the Prime Minister of India, Modi, and Xi Jinping has met at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. And many people think in Taiwan, some people think that doesn't mean anything because India and China still have the conflict on the border issue. So even these two leaders meet, and then maybe for 2 or 3 months, the conflict still happen or fights still happen in the border area. But some of people in Taiwan that think that even even India and China has conflict on the border issue, but their leaders still have the channel to communicate, and the channel in Taiwan and between Taiwan and China, it hasn't exist. So this part of people think the communicate to the Taiwan strike crisis is very important to need to establish. And also the November, and Taiwan also have the local election in November. So I think this is observed checkpoint to Taiwan politics, and the government try to maybe change or keep his diplomatic policies. And according to the foreign policies shown by India in the past, it might be difficult to expect that India to choose Taiwan's side in the crisis of Taiwan Strait, because as I know that India's foreign policy always stand in the neutral of the or no airline attitude. But in this viewpoint, I think that after the Modi Prime Minister meet the Xi Jinping, I think India should be also contact with or interaction with Taiwan briefly. I think India is a major country in South Asia, even in the world, in the Pacific region, whatever. And I think it had such wisdom to handle the regional diplomatic issue, even they need to face the China. And this is my short briefly sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In fact, again, those are useful remarks in the sense that you did share a public perceptions. The conditionality of public perception is actually very critical when it comes to the cross-strait ties. Taiwan's perception towards mainland China and mainland China's perception towards Taiwan. And also your point about India, taking lessons from this crisis is also very critical. Now, with this note, let me open the floor for discussion, and I'm sure there will be some questions from the audience, and I could see already there is a question from in the chat box. Let's take this question, and probably I will have some comments to generate discussion. But let's take these questions from Abhishek Indrajit Karatkar, who is asking, thank you for this discussion. I would like to know the possible impact of global semiconductor industry due to Taiwan crisis, especially considering Taiwan's dominance in this sector. Will TSMC and other companies locate to other countries like India or US to avoid falling in the hands of mainland China? I would probably direct these questions to Professor Shen just to comment, and probably then I'll come to Dr. Dorsey and Dr. Sripanna for their comments and others. But my take on the subject is that this is a very critical issue. And this issue is linked with global supply chain, global economic conditions, and it's not really easy to sort it out so quickly. And I think in order to transfer the semiconductor industry, the countries needs to have, on the first hand, the countries needs to have full infrastructure facilities to have the semiconductor industries. And I think India is one country where there is potential for good infrastructure, but again, we are not yet competent enough to have semiconductor industry. And I think with Taiwan, there is a talk going on for a long time, and some good openings has happened on these issues, but then it will take time because here we are talking about the shifting of industry. So I think this is one thing where we need to keep it in mind, infrastructural issue. The other thing is that it's not about locating to the other country. It's also about providing security, also trying to link it with the local economic conditions or that particular country's economic conditions. And I think there many countries, including India, has to take a call. Of course, there is a chance probably that some of these companies might be shifted to US. But again, coming to emerging economies, social where social issues are really prominent like India, I think it will be a very difficult process in the near future, even though there is always a potential. With these comments, let me invite comments from Professor Shen. Maybe you would like to address this question first.
Okay. Yes, TSMC already thinking about their investment in different countries. Right now, TSMC already invest in the United States, Arizona. Is already building their facility right now, and then TSMC also invest in Japan. So these two countries it's very sure that the overseas investment of TSMC, and we can see that I think maybe India also invite TSMC invest in India, but right now it's only Foxconn invest in India. And the policy of TSMC is keep the critical technology of semiconductor in Taiwan, because we know that the TSMC also invest in Nanyang, but that is 7 nano technology. So the critical technology is still stay in Taiwan. So you can see that in the drill, when the Pelosi visit, the exercise is 3 days, but in first day, the missile launch drill only 2 hours and stop, and then release, not broadcast, because if broadcast, Taiwan semiconductor production cannot move to mainland China, cannot move to other country, so it will make a very big economic impact to the whole world in global supply chain. So I think if China want to blockade Taiwan, we're thinking about this, and also Taiwan and also TSMC, another company, semiconductor company, already thinking about how to, if China blockade Taiwan, and how to reduce the risk of global supply chains. So I think is already two country TSMC investment, and maybe right now we are talking about another country in East Europe. So maybe TSMC will invest there. Thank you.
Mr. Dorsey, you have any comments to share? You are again muted. You have to unmute yourself.
I can just add to what Dr. Shen said. I think there's several aspects to this. One is that in addition to the question of security of the facilities in Taiwan, there is also the issue of, if you wish, decentralizing the global supply chain. So with other words, increasingly semiconductors are a critical asset, and no one country wants to be dependent on only one country.
Yeah.
And so I think that the investments that Dr. Shen very rightfully mentioned are not only an issue of securing facilities in countries where they are likely to be, or where there's likely to be less risk, but it is also a question of decentralization. I think the other aspect of this also is that what you're seeing, and that's particularly true between China, the United States, and Taiwan, there is enormous competition to maintain competitive edge. And so I think that the decentralization process is also part of that effort to ensure that you have that that knowledge edge and that competitive manufacturing edge.
Dr. Sripanna?
I think most of the points have been covered, but I would just like to quickly point out something over here, which is that, Beijing's this whole round of economic coercion, which it has unleashed, or it at least is trying to unleash against Taiwan. It's talked about, stopping exports of sand. It suspended imports of Taiwanese citrus fruits and fish. All of this somehow has left out the semiconductors. So the question here is why. China or the PRC definitely needs the semiconductors, and semiconductors are things which are important for security, which is why the globe is watching Taiwan. Would companies really be relocating? Last year, for the first time, on a generally larger scale than what has happened earlier, Taiwan's companies have invested more in ASEAN countries. And these countries are setting up a new global supply chain that can make them a second factory of the world. And there are a lot of these examples that is there. And, there was this report in the Financial Times, which had talked about, as to how the Taiwanese government is considering fining tech giant Foxconn up to, something around 900,000 million US dollars over its investment in a Chinese chip conglomerate. So, things are happening rapidly, and we can clearly see an attempt to create some sort of an alternative supply chain so that Taiwanese companies don't have to just, work within China to create chips or to create semiconductors, because business there is proving to be unstable, not just because of the Taiwan Straits crisis, but even before that, because of the US-China trade war. So things are happening. Maybe it's going to take a little time, but at least the process is in motion at the moment.
Thank you very much. You have anything to add, Dr. Namrata or Roberto?
No, not really. I think everything has been covered, and I think I wanted to say the same point as Sripanna, that they have kind of, the economic thing. They have, targeted the small farmers or, small businesses, but they have stayed away from mentioning anything about the semiconductor industry. That shows, of course, its importance also, and so I mean that's the only point I wanted to make. But there are a few other interesting questions where
So, Roberto, you have anything to add on the semiconductor issue?
And I think that the Taiwan Strait crisis it must affect the supply chain of the semiconductor. So I think that the Taiwan need to separate the risk of the supply chain, because all the material of the things to make the product most of them doesn't from Taiwan. So I think the Taiwan or the company need to separate the risk to other country to make the supply chain doesn't make any broke from the crisis. So that is why the semicon company want to seek some place or country to investment, like India or US. I think most of the country is the biggest country in the world. So I think that it can protect the supply chain in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With this, let's take some other questions which are there. There is a question directly towards me that India is not ready to take a position on Taiwan Strait. May I ask under what circumstances India will be ready to take a position? Then there is a question from Sneha Sen Gupta to all the panelists that I would like to understand the position of regional organizations like ASEAN on the Taiwan Strait crisis, since many of the ASEAN member states share concerns regarding China's growing influence in the South China Sea, but at the same time are economically dependent on China. And I think let's mix these two questions, even though we have to answer probably separately. But let me share my thoughts on the first question particularly, is that there is not a single issue in the Taiwan Strait. There are a range of issues in the Taiwan Strait. So we need to be very clear about what kind of issues we are talking about when it comes to Taiwan Strait. Are we talking about sovereignty issues? Are we talking about territorial integrity issues? Are we really talking about military occupation? Are we talking about the maritime issues on the Taiwan Strait? Are we really talking about only providing security to Taiwan? I think there are many layers of the, a range of political and security issues are there in the Taiwan Strait. So we need to really talk about each of these issues separately, even though one is connected to the other. The second one is that, not taking a position itself is a position. If you see the India-China joint statement and the official briefings from 2009 or 10 or 11 onwards, we have stopped mentioning about one China policy. So many countries have done that. So this is about, keeping the Chinese guessing on many issues. And it is like, playing an ambivalent card of wherever you could play. So not taking a position is also a kind of a position. And given the rising tensions with the Chinese and the way the Chinese are trying to change the status quo on the boundary issues, not only in the Western sector, but also previously, if we take into account the kind of role they have played in the middle sector and in the Eastern sector in terms of military aggressions and diplomatic claims, new claims. And I think that also serves India's interest not to take a position, but wait for a right time to react to the situation. Third is, and I think here also a range of issues has to be clarified between India and Taiwan, which Indian public, Indian intellectuals, and intellectuals on the Taiwan side, our Taiwanese friend, we have not really discussed about this. For example, is Taiwan really ready to take an open and clear-cut position on India-China boundary dispute? What are the political parties' position when it comes to DPP and KMT's position on India-China boundary issues? I mean, of course, the DPP has shown a overtly political support towards India-China boundary issues, but then it is linked with the historical elements of India-China boundary dispute. It goes to before 50s. So it is not really a single issue here we are talking about when we are talking about the cross-strait tensions or cross-strait crisis. It's a whole range of issues, including issues which are linked with the historical elements. With regard to Taiwan and other issues, with regard to ASEAN and other issues, I'll leave it to the panelists to comment on this. But again, we know for a fact that ASEAN is not really one definite agreed umbrella. It is just an association, and there is no per se constitution of ASEAN which is binding all the countries to agreed formulations when it comes to the Taiwan crisis or the Taiwan issues. So I think many international organizations, including European Union, also differs from country to country when it comes to taking a position on Taiwan. But I will invite other countries, other panelists to comment on this, including on the India questions if they feel like. But let me start with Dr. Namrata first.
Thank you, Dr. Panda. I think you've raised a very important point, which is that, which is raised many times when we have closed door discussions, that Taiwan claims the same territory as the People's Republic of China. And here comes a conflict of interest, of course, because many Indians, including not only academicians, I'm talking here about wide different sectors within the Indian society, which actually point out when we talk about Taiwan, that how can you expect us to support Taiwan when they actually claim the same territory as PRC? So either, I know, of course, DPP is very different from KMT, the philosophy is very different, the ideology is very different, but we have never heard a very clear view as to, what DPP thinks on. Maybe Dr. Ming-Shih and Roberto here can probably, let us know if there are any, because I have not read any comments where they have actually clarified on this. So this makes India's position very dicey. Because I've spoken to, because we've had track 1.1 and 1.5 and other discussions where these issues have been raised, that unless Taiwan makes their position clear on this, it's difficult for India also to come out with a clear-cut stand. So, when it comes to this issue, I think this is the main, focus that I would, this is the main thing that I would like to say. Of course, ASEAN countries, they made, I don't, because individually, of course, they have different stances. Even when it comes to China, they themselves are locked into, this territorial issues with China when it comes to South China Sea. But there was actually a statement where they said that ASEAN stands ready to play a constructive role in facilitating peaceful dialogue between all parties. I think that's the official statement that ASEAN actually released during the Taiwan crisis, where they said that open conflicts and unpredictable consequences can come out after, whatever the reaction that China has displayed, and they called for maximum restraint. So I think this is the official statement that the ASEAN actually said after the crisis. So I think, of course, what they meant from the statement is that, probably they wanted to call for restraint, they abstained from naming China, but they said that, restraint should be maintained and a peaceful resolution should be there. So I think that's what ASEAN stand was for this crisis. Thanks.
Dr. Suparna, you have anything to add?
I think both of you have pretty much added already. But the thing is, just one point to the India question: when would India really be ready, or could India ever, move away from the one China principle? The ruling hegemon of the current international system, the United States of America, has also not moved away from the one China principle. So it is a little too difficult to expect India, which is nowhere in even the top three as far as power credentials go, that it would move away. Secondly, with regards to India, the thing is, we've been locked in a conflict with China from 2020 onwards. Almost no country explicitly took India's side. The US made a statement. The US intelligence gave India a few inputs on the border. But yeah, that's that. So, it was the conflict, the fact that India was holding down a large regiment of the PLA, which could have been utilized for further, further threatening Taiwan, that has been missed. Even though, China, the PRC has said that it's going to move back its troops, as satellite imagery shows right now, it has not really done so. So the Indian army continues to hold a huge regiment of the PLA, which the PRC otherwise possibly could have used elsewhere. So I think that's something that we need to factor in. I think Namrata has pretty much already talked about how India's Arunachal Pradesh, which China calls it the southern Tibet, is exactly the same thing which is there as far as Taiwan's considerations go. So there are a lot of these issues which need to be resolved. Otherwise, in principle, it's not really going to happen. So that's that. With regards to ASEAN, Namrata also mentioned that there was this statement from ASEAN, and it said that it opposes provocative actions in the Taiwan Straits crisis. Point here to note is that Cambodia is the current chair of the ASEAN, and Cambodia is heavily indebted to China. So, even though there's been a group statement per se, individuals members, of course, would vary. Another thing with respect to, the ASEAN is that there's this lack of a very strong determination and a longer term perspective, which is why even in the statement that was given out, in that statement, there was no direct naming of the Taiwan Straits, and the grouping said developments could lead to miscalculation, serious confrontation, etc. So, where exactly is ASEAN? It would not really want to burn its bridges with the PRC. So, difficult to really understand. Would ASEAN countries, heavens forbid, if China, if the PRC actually unleashes a full-blown attack on Taiwan, would ASEAN countries come to the rescue? I would assume from whatever statements that they've put out so far, from whatever posturing that they've undertaken so far, again, it's going to be either a neutral stance or they would not make any sort of comment. So that's my reading of the situation so far.
Thank you very much. Now,
Can I just add something in on ASEAN?
Yes, I will come to you. So in the interest of the time, let's take the other two comments from the chat box, and then I'll come to Mr. Dorsey first, and then to our Taiwanese friend to comment on this. There is a question about, about the importance of Quad regarding the Taiwan crisis, even though Taiwan is officially not a part of the Quad. And then there is again some comments on the, on the TSMC. Maybe you can look at the chat box and comment on some of these questions that are there. So over to you, Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you. Just a couple of remarks with regard to ASEAN. It's a matter of debate whether the lesser degree of regional integration and institutional capacity that ASEAN has versus other regional groupings like the European Union, whether that is a strength or a weakness. ASEAN would probably argue that that has been its strength in keeping together over the last half a century. China probably is one of the most divisive issues. I think one's got to keep in mind that ASEAN feels that it is almost on the front line in terms of whatever conflict or disputes there may be between the United States and China. Also keep in mind that a country like Singapore is 85% ethnically Chinese. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that 85% of the population sympathizes with Beijing, but it is an ethnically Chinese country, and the Chinese love to refer to Singapore not as a Singaporean country, but as a Chinese country. And so I think that, and then the last factor to keep in mind of this is that several of the ASEAN members are directly involved in South China Sea disputes with China claiming territorial waters of various countries, whether it's Vietnam, Malaysia, or the Philippines. So I think that all of that. And then what the earlier speaker pointed out, of course, that there are governments and countries with closer relationships to China and others with less close relationships or a different emphasis in the relationships. Cambodia versus, for example, Singapore, and we'll have to see which way the Philippines go. I just wanted to add those into terms of considerations of how ASEAN speaks and moves.
Thank you very much. Professor Shen, you have anything to offer?
Okay, because we have 4 questions, I respond briefly. First one, that India take position on Taiwan Strait. I think in peacetime, India can keep your non-alignment, strategic autonomy, or even maybe the dynamic balance is okay. But when Taiwan Strait breaking conflict, you need to think about the next, maybe the China-India border. Maybe China will occupy Taiwan and become a biggest common country in the world, and then the threat will move to the India. Taiwan will not expect that India will take position, stand on Taiwan side, but we need your support that the communist country cannot invade a democratic country. No excuse. Okay. The second is about the Asian country. Maybe the South China Sea neighboring country attitude is different from another country. So I think Singapore, their PM already said that ASEAN country cannot choose United States or China. But if Taiwan Strait brings conflict, a United States decide to support Taiwan or intervene Taiwan, that the country who have defense agreement, like Singapore, like the Philippines, will intervene together with United States. And about the Quad, we can see that the 4 countries is a Quad: United States, Japan, Australia. United States and Japan maybe have a very strong attitude that intervene the Taiwan Strait issue. Australia maybe because the United States intervene, so Australia will intervene. But the focus is on India. What India is thinking when Quad country decide to support or intervene the Taiwan Strait, and what India is thinking. I think they're the key point. And then the last question talking about the water issue of the TSMC. I think that before TSMC invest in Taiwan, will consider the water issue and environment protection issue. At present, that the TSMC take care of water problem by itself, including to the waste water recycling, and can also provide some water or some electricity to the local government. TSMC right now have almost 5,000 water trunk that can supply the water. So the drought of last year, I think, is a specific case, and this year we don't have this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have to finish it in few minutes. Before we finish, maybe invite Mr. Lin. You have any comments to offer to the questions?
Okay, I would like to talk about the Quad, the issue, and the Southeast Asia's issue. And in the Quad, that has 4 countries in the region, like Australia, Japan, India, and the US. I think this is a kind of NATO things in Asia Pacific area. And so I think these 4 countries maybe do more about it. It should over normal discussion of leaders and the military exercise. So I think in Taiwan Strait crisis, the people in this region and the country of the Quad need to pay attention to China, what the China wants to do next. So I think the security organization need to get more response for the crisis of Taiwan Strait. And then in 2020 and in this year, that has a lot of things happened, like the Sri Lanka financial crisis. In this issue, we can see the China doesn't give more support to the Sri Lanka's government, and but they still have a lot of the support response to the Southeast Asia country. And as we know, that Southeast Asia country is made up by the 10 countries. So China and how China to handle these 2 and these 10 countries is it can break each other. So they can deal with Vietnam only, or they can deal with the Cambodia only. So we can see the Cambodia has very get close to the China. Even this day, they got a lot of military forces from China's PLA military. So I think Southeast Asia country needs to more unified to face the Taiwan Strait crisis, because it's really near by the Southeast Asia. And the first one is the Philippines and the Vietnam is in the first line of the Taiwan Strait. So I think not only Quad or the Southeast Asia countries need to be more attention about the China's extends to the Asia Pacific region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think you would agree with me that this has been a fascinating discussion all this while, and I think more we discuss about Taiwan, we feel more insecure about ourselves, because Taiwan is an integral part of the Indo-Pacific regions. And I think this invites for more discussion, more clarity on a range of issues that is there in the regions that concerns us, and to a range of countries and range of people in the regions. And I think, Mr. Lin, your point about the public perception earlier in the session is very vital, because public perception is one critical aspect that we need to really discuss about how the public perception in different countries in Indo-Pacific are shaping up towards whether in favor of Taiwan or not in favor of Taiwan. That is another aspect probably we can discuss some other day. But with this note, let me, as we have crossed almost 15 minutes to the discussion, to the time limit, let me thank all the panelists here for their excellent comments, and my special thanks to Mr. Pandya for this kind invitation, and also to Ms. Preeti for this arrangement, logistical arrangement, and I'm really thankful to the Usanas Foundation for allowing me to moderate this discussion. We'll some other day discuss in more details on this issue, but thank you very much and have a very good evening. Over to you. Over to you, Mr. Pandya.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
So first and foremost, my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Panda for such an amazing moderation and chairing of the session. And also my sincere thanks to the esteemed panelists here today, Mr. Robert Lin, Dr. Shen, Dr. Dorsey, Dr. Shiparna Pathak, and Namrata Hasija. This has been an absolutely enlightening session on such a critical topic, and definitely, I mean, I also learned a lot. Dr. Pandya, you brought out the historical part of the Taiwan conflict, which was really amazing, because we all need to look at the history to understand the present. And Dr. Dorsey spoke about this visit of Nancy Pelosi as an accident which was bound to happen. Certainly, this brings something to my mind. That in the future also, whether such accidents are more likely, or we have a different future. On one hand, there is a domestic angle to this Chinese shrill voices over Taiwan. Whatever Mr. Xi Jinping is doing, if he is doing to placate the hyper-nationalist populist constituency in China, that is one aspect of it. And on the other hand, we also talk about the Chinese long-term worldview of occupying the five fingers, and also the territorial acquisition of Taiwan and the global leadership claims. So in the future, where are we exactly headed to? Is it just going to be a temporary one-off kind of a reaction, or will we see the major manifestation of China's long-term worldview, that is the territorial acquisition of Taiwan? But whatever be the case, the fact remains that we are living in a fractious world. Definitely, international institutions are being challenged. International rules, global norms are being challenged. Today, we witness a fight between dictatorship and democracy, and it's a different world. So in this, certainly what we can have at the minimum is some kind of a meta guide, some consensus points, wherein if we are not able to completely avoid the conflict, we can at least prolong it. We can identify, spot the areas which are problem areas, we can discuss about it. A recent foreign policy article mentioned that the international relations theory suggests that we are in for a major global war in the near future or in the distant future. And we have seen that happening in the history also. So I guess at this stage, if we cannot have a completely perfect utopian world, then at least some kind of a meta guide arriving at some consensus points to avoid, at least to delay these conflicts and arrive at some consensus based solutions for these things. Definitely we'll have more of such discussions in the future, and also we can have some in-house discussions in the future. And last point, which that takes me back to what Namrata said, that if Mr. G feels that the domestic conditions are congenial, then he may go in for a proper territorial attack or something like that. Okay? And if so, what strikes me is that if he thinks that if it's not possible to invade Taiwan successfully, then can this territorial attack be diverted to some other side, maybe the Himalayan border? So that makes it a problem for us also. So these are the questions which we all need to ponder upon, we all need to think about, and we have eminent experts. We'll keep you inviting for the future events also. Once again, thank you very much for joining, sir, and see you soon. And I would also like to thank all the participants for joining us today. Thank you.